The Siege of Bexar was a 3-month-long siege during the Texas Revolution that lasted from October 12, 1835 to December 11, 1835, and would be the earliest campaign of the Texas Revolution. As volunteers flocked to Gonzales, the Texians would attempt to organize the loose band of volunteers into army units. When Stephen F. Austin arrived at Gonzales, he would be elected commander-in-chief. Even though Austin was not a trained military leader, he was well respected by most Texians and would organize elections for regimental officers. John Henry Moore, who had led the Texians in the Battle of Gonzales, was elected colonel. Edward Burleson, a former militia officer in Missouri and Tennessee, was named lieutenant colonel, and Brazoria merchant Alexander Somerville was elected major. After organizing the 300 volunteers into companies, they would begin plans to attack General Cos, and the march to San Antonio would begin on October 12, 1835. By the time the Texians camped along the Salado Creek east of San Antonio in mid-October, their numbers had grown to over 400 men, including James Bowie and Juan N. Seguin, who brought with him a company of Mexican Texans. General Cos fortified the town's plazas west of the San Antonio River and the Alamo, a former mission east of the stream. Even with the additional men, Austin realized that his army was not large enough to prevail in a full assault on Bexar, and the Texians thus prepared for a siege. On October 22nd, Austin named Bowie and Captain James W. Fannin co-commanders of the 1st Battalion and sent them on a reconnaissance mission. By the end of the day, the Texians had seized the Espada mission just south of San Antonio. On October 24th, Austin informed the Committee of Public Safety that he had initiated a siege. In his opinion, the city would be taken in a few days if Texian reinforcements arrived quickly. From the Espada mission on October 27th, Austin sent Bowie and Fannin forward to Mission Concepcion with 90 men to locate a position closer to the town. There, on a foggy morning of the 28th of October, Cos sent Colonel Domingo de Ucatechea with 275 men to attack the Texian force. The Texians drove off the assault from a position along the bank of the San Antonio River, inflicting over 50 casualties and capturing 1 cannon. Austin arrived after the battle, which became known as the Battle of Concepcion, to urge an attack on San Antonio, but found little support among his officers. After the battle, Cos would resume defensive positions in San Antonio and the Alamo, while the Texians established camps on the river above and below the town and grew to an army of 600, with reinforcements from East Texas led by Thomas J. Rusk. Sam Houston would arrive in San Felipe de Austin, expecting to gather for a meeting of the consultation government, but since many of its members were fighting in the Siege of Bexar, Houston instead went to the Texian army outside of San Antonio. When Houston arrived in the Texian camp, Austin offered him command of the army, but Houston declined and went ahead gathering the members of the consultation and would return to San Felipe. There the delegates agreed to fight to uphold the Constitution of 1824 rather than Texas independence from Mexico. Houston was named General-in-Chief of all Texian forces except those fighting around San Antonio. The Texian people had little to no experience as professional soldiers, and by early November, the weather began to turn colder and rations grew smaller, which led many soldiers in the Texian army to desert. But on November 18th, however, a group of volunteers from the United States, known as the New Orleans Greys, joined the Texian army with 122 men. Texian and Mexican cavalry skirmished from time to time as the Texians scouted to capture Mexican supplies and to warn of any reinforcements for Cos. After a lack of early success, William Barrett Travis led a capture of 300 Mexican mules and horses grazing beyond the Medina River on November 8th. 4 days later, Ugartechea left San Antonio with a small cavalry force to direct the march of reinforcements from below the Rio Grande. Austin sent cavalry to intercept him, but the Mexican troops evaded the Texian force. Those companies of the Texian army who had arrived recently from the United States were eager to face the Mexican army directly. Encouraged by their enthusiasm, on November 21st, Austin ordered an assault on Bexar the following morning, but discovered that fewer than 100 men were willing to go forward with the attack. Unhappy with the lack of faith from his soldiers, Austin would leave to assume diplomatic duties in the United States, and the Texian troops elected Edward Burleson as the new commander-in-chief of the Texian army. When Erastus Deaf Smith reported approaching Mexican cavalry on November 26, Burleson ordered troops out to cut them off. Skirmishing followed near the Alizan Creek west of the town, with attack and counterattack from both sides. Finally, the Mexican troops withdrew to San Antonio, and the engagement would become known as the Grass Fight. Because of limited supplies and the approaching winter, Burleson considered withdrawing to Goliad at the beginning of December. One of the officers who strongly opposed the withdrawal, Colonel Benjamin Milam, would stalk into the Texian camp and call out, "Who will go with old Ben Milam to San Antonio?" 300 soldiers cheered their support. On December 1st, the Texian army received information on Mexican defenses from Texians who were allowed to leave San Antonio, which led to new attack plans. When a Mexican officer surrendered with news of the declining Mexican morale, Milam and William Gordon Cook gathered more than 300 volunteers to attack the town. While Burleson and another 400 men scouted San Antonio, protected the camp and its supplies, and forced Cos to keep his men divided between the town and the Alamo. Before dawn on December 5th, James C. Neal distracted the Mexican forces with artillery fire on the Alamo, while Milam and Francis W. Johnson led 2 divisions in a surprise attack that seized the Verandadia and Graza houses north of the plaza in San Antonio. The Texians were unable to advance any further that day, but they fortified the houses and remained there during the night, digging trenches and destroying nearby buildings. On December 7th, the attack continued, and Milam's forces captured another foothold in the city. However, Milam was killed by a sharpshooter while leading the attack. Colonel Johnson subsequently took command of both his and Milam's men and continued the street fighting, gradually driving the Mexicans back into the city. Cos withdrew into the Alamo, where he was joined by Colonel Urgratechea and 600 reinforcements, but it was too little, too late. Cos entrenched his position, and the Texian artillery pounded the fortified mission. Faced with overwhelming odds, and after a brutal 56-day siege of the town and the Alamo mission, on December 9th, Cos surrendered San Antonio de Bexar to the Texian army. Burleson accepted the surrender and the surrender of the Mexican equipment and weapons, but allowed Cos and his men to retire southward because neither army had supplies to sustain a large group of prisoners. Texian casualties numbered at 30 to 35, while Mexican losses, primarily in the Morelos Infantry Battalion, who defended San Antonio bravely, totaled at about 150 men. The difference in casualties reflected the greater accuracy of the Texian rifles. To celebrate their victory, Texian troops threw a fandango on the evening of December 10th. Most of the Texian volunteers went home after the battle, but Texian troops remained in the town, which, with Cos's withdrawal, left San Antonio and all of Texas under Texian control.